Scion Kalen stood before the crystalline throne, flanked by two children with swirling tricolor eyes, and watched her father's hand tremble over the order for her husband's execution. The Archon's face was a mask of jagged obsidian, his fingers hovering inches above the holographic seal that would end Elias's life. One word from her could trigger the guards, but the silence in the chamber was so heavy it felt structural. If you've ever wondered what happens when a princess of starlight meets an engineer of grease and grit, you're about to find out. Subscribe to follow their journey across the unmapped sectors. Now let's see how this defiance began. 12 years earlier, the station's water recycler had broken for the third time that week. Vane watched the Scion from the shadows of the docking bay, his sensor array twitching at the sheer impropriety of the scene. Kalen was supposed to be reviewing the joint venture protocols for the Astrum hegemony, but instead, she was staring at a human. The man, Elias Thorne, was currently waist-deep in the primary coupling of a survey ship, his skin mapped with streaks of black engine grease. He didn't bow. He didn't even look up when the Royal Protector's shadow fell across his workspace. "You're standing in my light," Elias muttered. Vane's internal processors whirred with indignation. He stepped forward, his metallic chassis humming, ready to relocate the organic threat to a more respectful distance. But Kalen raised a hand, her silken sleeve catching the harsh, industrial glare of the bay. She wasn't offended. To Vane's analytical confusion, she looked fascinated. She reached out, her pale fingers hovering near a smudge of grease on Elias's cheek, a mark of common status that should have repulsed her. "The resonance frequencies are off," Kalen said, her voice like melodic glass. "Your Terran tech is trying to swallow hegemony energy whole rather than dancing with it." Elias finally surfaced, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. He looked her in the eye, a direct violation of Article 4, and grinned. It was a messy, asymmetrical expression. "Then maybe your energy needs to stop being so stiff and learn how to take a punch." The Sentinel recorded the interaction as a Tier 2 dignity breach, but the Scion didn't order a reprimand. Instead, she sat on a tool crate. Over the next few weeks, the observation logs grew increasingly irregular. Vane watched them move from the workshop to the observation deck, where they spent hours merging hegemony crystalline lattices with human copper wiring. Duty and autonomy were concepts Vane understood only as lines of code, but he saw the tension growing in Kalen's posture. She was a bridge being built in secret. Then the recall order arrived. The domestic crisis on the home world required a political marriage to solidify the throne. Kalen was to return immediately. Vane prepared the transport, expecting the usual compliance of a royal heir. He did not expect to find the Scion and the engineer standing in the shadows of a stolen survey ship, their hands locked together. The choice was a jagged thing. "If we do this," Elias whispered, "there are no return coordinates." Kalen looked at the smudge of grease still darkening his jaw, then back at the cold, looming stars of her empire. "I've spent my life following coordinates someone else drew for me, Elias. I think it's time I learned how to fly." 12 years of exile drifted past in the silence of the nebula of veils. Vane remained a fixed point in the dark, his sensors tracking the gradual transformation of a stolen survey ship into a living testament of human-alien synthesis. He watched as the Scion traded her crystalline robes for heavy-duty overalls, her hands becoming as calloused and stained as the engineers. The children were the greatest anomaly Vane had ever recorded. Ion and Lyra didn't just inherit DNA, they inherited a perspective that defied the rigid logic of the hegemony. They played among the power cells, balancing volatile Astrum crystals against crude human heatsinks. This was the synthesis the Elders had spent centuries calling impossible. By merging the rigid, high-output energy of the Astrum with the adaptable, resilient mechanics of Terra, the children solved the overload paradox that was currently starving the home world of power. They weren't just hybrids, they were an evolution. But the signal from the hegemony eventually pierced the nebula. It wasn't a command, but a dying gasp. The homeworld's energy grid was collapsing, a slow death caused by the very purity they worshipped. Kayla knew they couldn't stay hidden while her people went dark. And now, Back in the chamber of the crystalline throne, the weight of that decade's silence pressed against the obsidian walls. The Archon's hand remained poised over the holographic seal. He looked at the children, his lip curling in a snarl of perceived abomination, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition. How could a king ignore a heart that beat with the rhythm of his own failing empire? The children didn't cower. Lyra stepped forward first, her tricolor eyes, violet, gold, and a deep, Terran brown, locking onto her grandfather's. She didn't speak of politics or rights. She simply reached out and touched the base of the throne itself. The crystalline structure, dull and flickering with the planet's decay, suddenly flared to life. Beneath her small palm, the energy didn't just flow, it sang. She was using a human grounding technique to stabilize the royal power core, a trick Elias had taught her, while she helped him fix the ship's thrusters in the void. The Archon's hand didn't drop the seal. It fell limp. He saw the future not as a threat, but as a lifeline. The mistake of nature was the only thing capable of keeping his legacy from turning to ash. Kaelin stood her ground, her gaze steady, watching the obsidian mask of her father finally crack. The order for execution flickered out, replaced by a surge of restorative light that filled the room. Later, in the quiet of the inner sanctum, the Archon sat with his grandson. The boy climbed onto the royal lap, reaching up to touch the aged, translucent skin of the High King. Vayne watched as the Archon leaned down, his forehead resting against the child's. "You have your mother's stubbornness," the old man whispered. When he pulled away, a faint, dark smudge of engine grease from the boy's sleeve remained on the Archon's cheek. The Archon didn't wipe it away. Acceptance is the hardest bridge to build, but sometimes the smallest hands are the ones that finish the work. Join us tomorrow as we chronicle the next chapter of the Hegemony's rebirth and see what happens when the stars finally meet the soil.